Good day to you kind folk. This video is for all the Inquisitor Martyr players who are thinking that the melee combat system and animations look a little bit off and not quite right. This video is going to be going into some of the more technical detail regarding the major differences between Inquisitor and other ARPGs, so we can clearly show the devs what they need to tweak in order to make this game on par with the others. I'd like you to think of this video as like a petition. Like it if you agree with me, share a comment, do something so the devs can see what needs to be changed, and I guarantee if enough of you take some action, there will be the changes we need to make this combat system truly beautiful. So what we're going to do to get cracking on with this, to diagnose our problem, is we're going to be comparing to begin with Path of Exile, which is a well-known ARPG, not perhaps the best visually, but a very solid contender. So we're going to break this down into parts now. We're going to be looking first at the visual system, the visual animations made by each of the melee attacks. Starting off with Path of Exile, you'll see what I've done here is created a character with a moveset very similar, 4 abilities, very similar to the Eviscerator or Greatsword, which we'll see within Inquisitor, just so it makes it a little bit easier to make these comparisons directly. So looking here, we have each of the visuals being made very unique, and they also have some additional effects to them. So we've got little bits of orange, we've got sort of shockwaves coming out from the AoE whirlwinds. There's additional effects in addition to the sword moving through the air. What you'll notice is it's quite hard to actually visually track a sword moving, especially when you get a little bit of attack speed on some of these characters. So these additional effects make the moves certainly look a little bit more unique. Now, let's look at the Martyr comparison. What you'll see here is there are no additional effects. There are simply the swords, the weapons moving through the air, which is kind of okay. We don't have to have anything here. The attack speed's actually a little bit slower, but I do actually find, visually speaking, it's quite difficult to track where the weapon's going, and hence from the animations point of view, if you're surrounded by enemies, it's actually quite hard to see which ability you've just done if they're two very similar looking single strike abilities. Obviously the AoE looks fairly unique, but even then it actually just looks like your character spins in a circle. What I'm trying to get at here is we've got 4 abilities that all look rather similar and don't have a really unique flavour to them. But what I would say is the core animation, if you compare these two video clips, the core animations of the Inquisitor, or Crusader rather, spinning in a circle, looks pretty neat, looks pretty sharp, looks pretty nice with a manner of different weapons. I have to say I don't think there's much actually that needs to be changed here, although the pirouette on the toes for the Eviscerator spinning in a circle looks a little girly to me, but hey, I'll let that one slide because, well, it probably is the only way to spin in a circle effectively if it's not something like an axe. That's fine. Let's move on. Let's move on and talk about the visuals now within combat, because when you're hitting an enemy, the visual effects do change. So in Path of Exile, what you'll see is you have clear connecting impacts being made with the enemies. You can see the physics engine really working and them getting knocked back, hit, and you can see all of the physics are working in all the right ways. Each enemy is clearly reacting to each angle of hit. Now in Inquisitor, there is the same system in place. When you hit an enemy, they are knocked back, although it does seem a little bit less consistent. There's quite a few times when you do an AoE knockback, for example, and only half the enemies are knocked back, and because of the lack of clear animation, it's actually quite hard to infer how big is your knockback circle to begin with. So you're actually not sure, should I have knocked that person back or should I not? Well, they must have been outside, I don't even know. So basically it looks a little bit less impressive here, and what we have are only the death animations. So if we're going through someone with this Eviscerator chainsword, which is a 2-handed chainsword, when I'm cutting through them, there's not actually much in the way of additional effects. There's no blood spraying everywhere. I do have the graphics turned up right the way to full. Same when I hit someone with a power weapon, there's no sparks of electricity flying. Maybe it's something that's not been put into the game yet. Maybe it's just an additional layer of graphics that's going to be implemented once they turn up the settings. But again, I would say I'm running everything on the max settings here. It may not look that pretty. I'm not running the best rig in the world. But what I will say is there are some clear differences between these two games. Now, what I've found is there's actually a bigger difference when it comes to the audio comparison between the two games, and I think this really does a good job of showing where the two games sort of come apart from each other. So again, Path of Exile, clear audio for each move and unique audio for each move. I can close my eyes and do each of these 4 abilities and I can tell you which one has been used because they are so unique just from the sounds. Very nice, very crisp. You know when the attack started, when it stopped, and you can tell exactly what's going on. If we compare this with Inquisitor though, we have the sound effect purely being the swing of the blade. Whereas going back to Path of Exile, the effort in the attack really comes through with the audio. You can really hear the oof and It sounds like your characters had to put a lot of effort into the swing, and you might argue, well, I'm a Crusader, I don't even have to put in effort, I'm wearing power armour. But it does make them feel a bit bleh. When you're swinging a sword, you just hear a little swing, 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 swing. It doesn't sound like a mighty whack, thud, smack. We need a little bit more oomph here. We need a little bit more oomph from these. And what you'll notice with the Eviscerator in particular is only one of the 4 abilities actually use the motor component of the chainsword. The rest of them are just swinging the weapon like a sword. I'm assuming that's placeholder stuff. I'm really hoping the devs have clear sort of humming from the motor and then it revs up when you're doing these moves. I think that's something that needs a little bit of work for such an iconic weapon. Let's move on now to the noises made within combat, because again there are some pretty big differences here. If we look at Path of Exile, we've got really clear connecting thunks, dunks, smacks, whacks, etc. for every time you connect a blow with an enemy. No matter what else is going on, no matter who else is attacking you, you can always hear these smacks. It is the most prominent sound in your ears, okay? Very satisfying, very audible. Again, just like the visuals, you can tell exactly when an animation started and when it stopped just by the audio. You could close your eyes and tell how many enemies you attacked, how many of them you attacked, as well as if you did an AoE ability, you can actually pick up on the individual enemies getting hit by each twirl of the blade. Really, really satisfying. Now, if we compare that with Inquisitor, well, the audio sounds are there with the Power Sword and Great Sword. You do get a donk. However, it's really overshadowed by the enemy firepower. Now, obviously, Path of Exile, you don't have enemies with guns, so there's a pretty big difference between these two games. But it really, I think, is a bit of a problem for Inquisitor at the moment, because you really struggle to hear these whacks and thunks, and it just feels like you're in a sort of a mosh pit of demons swinging your arm around, and eventually one of them dies with all of these extra blares and blahs. And if anything, actually, we're still missing a lot of sound effects from the enemies. We know that we're not getting any decent audio from things like Dreadnought. So problem, we either need to turn down enemy volume or crank ours up. I would make the argument that what you're hearing needs to be what your Inquisitor is hearing. So your whack needs to be a much louder effect than an enemy gunshot that's the other side of the screen. I don't think they need to do it in a proximity setting, but just increasing the decibel of our attacks, decreasing the enemies slightly is going to fix this, and it's suddenly you're going to be able to tell that you're actually hitting an enemy and connecting hits. Simple fix, love it. Now, I'd like to talk about the global cooldown differences too, because there are some pretty big differences here. If you're level 1 on a ARPG like Path of Exile, the attack speed is actually fairly similar, not exactly the same, but fairly similar to the standard attack speed on Inquisitor. It's sort of a 1, 1, 1, swing, swing, swing. Nice and simple, nice and easy. However, by the time you get to late game, you will get attack speed in almost all ARPGs. It will come with your character leveling, it may come on gear, and suddenly it goes 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. If you build attack speed, it might be blah, 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 blah. It can get pretty ridiculous. Whereas it looks like we won't be, well, maybe we'll get attack speed in Inquisitor, but actually I would argue that it's not going to be suited to the game at all. But it means you're going to be at you're going to be running at a Nicolas Cage speed of 1, 2, 3, 4. That wasn't that great, I know, but it wasn't that bad. I think they can maybe speed it up a little bit, maybe with some steroids that will come in with the inoculator. That might make a bit of difference, but what I'd say is focus on all the other problems first, and then if this issue is still here, then maybe crank it up by 10% or something like that, but it doesn't need to be much. An issue that I've actually come across in the game quite a lot is because of the slower attack speed. Even though you can queue abilities, and by queuing an ability I mean if I press the 1 key to start doing my 1 ability, and before I finish if I press the 2, then I'll go straight on to doing the 2 ability. But what I tend to do, because the attack speed is so slow, is I press 1, I do the move, then I press 2, and I've actually released the 2 key before I've even finished the animation from the first ability. I'm hoping you're following with me with this, but for me it's made the combat feel really awkward because I'm pressing keys and expecting them to do damage, and it's just the pace of the combat that's really slowing it down and making it, well, it's making it harder to chain abilities. I think if any of us are used to quicker games, it's just mashing buttons going A, B, Y, X, Y. I'm sorry, I'm used to an Xbox controller, but you know what I'm saying. This is something that, well, maybe the devs can try and work with, but I think they're going to be limited by the fact that if you go too quickly attacking someone with a power sword, it's going to look ridiculous, as well as the fact that there may be attack speed increases further down the line that make this look a little bit more normal. In conclusion though, the TL, the DR from all of this is that sound wise we have some clear differences and some clear changes that need to be made to bring this on par with other ARPGs, and as well as that, visually speaking, we have some changes that need to be too. So just like I said from the beginning of this video, this is a call to action for you guys. I would like you to like this video, I'd like you to leave a comment on this video, forget subscribing to me, comment on this video for now, and make sure the devs know what you want to see. If you think the changes I've described are going to make a difference, the devs need to know this, because then they will make the changes, and I promise you they will, because they are watching very carefully for what we're asking for, and these changes are not that big. Adding a little bit of a shockwave to the end of a sword, or a little bit of a blue streak when you're attacking something, it's not a big change to make. It's a slight effect, but it could have a huge impact on the melee combat at the moment. So hopefully you've liked the video, guys. I'll go ahead, go and subscribe anyway. Remember to leave that comment, and I'll see you next time. You've been listening to Basic Hydra. Have a lovely day.